Welcome to Mentora Presents. Today I'd like to talk to you about interpreting performance test results. When we look at results from a performance test, we're looking for ways to visualize data. This helps us analyze the results and present findings to our stakeholders. With a picture, we can tell a story about what happened during a load test and communicate actionable information. Let's look at these pictures. This is a graph showing response times during a load test. The yellow steps show the increase in simulated users, which increased steadily through the first 50 minutes of the test to a peak of 500 users. The jagged lines show the response times for several business transactions. The crosshatch shows the point at which response times became unstable. The capacity of the system in this test was reached at about 290 simulated users. The sudden onset of much longer response times suggests that a resource limit was reached, and the relationship in response times between activities also supports that conclusion. The next step here was to look at resources and ultimately add more CPU capacity to the web servers. This graph shows average response time against load. Virtual users increased from 0 to 100 in the first 30 minutes of the load test. This test lasted 2 hours. Response time started out at less than half a second, but reached almost 2.5 seconds at full load and held there. The response time seems predictable, but the concern here is the 5-fold increase in response time that tracks with the load increase. This pattern suggests that the system has a limiting factor. Because the increase in response times is linear and starts with a low number of simulated users, it is probably not a resource limitation. The next step we recommended here was an architectural review to look for queuing points, such as database locking or server-side script instantiation. This graph shows average response time against load. Virtual users increased from 0 to 100 in the first 30 minutes of the load test, for a test that lasts 1 hour. The other lines are response times for activities that are essentially identical. This is why they track so closely together. The response times showing some volatility early is interesting, as are the spikes at minutes 35, 49, and 55. This could be some back-end system competing for resources, or perhaps contention at a virtualization layer. But the overall trend shows stable response times against the load, so this is considered a good result. This graph is an after picture following some refactoring of a SaaS application. This test's results validated code improvements, allowing the customer to go live. This graph uses a scatter chart to plot individual response times over an hour of testing. The left axis is response time in milliseconds. The legend on the right describes which colors are associated with response time samples from 5 different locations around the world. The banding of response times shows that response times for an activity varied substantially based on where the simulated clients were located. This graph was created during a project where we helped a company in New Zealand that was having trouble with a content delivery provider. In this test, we were able to show variation in response times from different locations, something the provider said couldn't happen. Armed with this graph, we helped our customer move past finger pointing to problem solving. So how do we get the data we use to visualize? By collecting it from load tools and hardware resources. This diagram shows some of the information we collected while testing a PeopleSoft upgrade. We monitored the database server, including both Oracle Database Server internals metrics and the underlying hardware resources. We monitored Java heaps and hardware resources on the app servers. On the web server, we monitored connections, queues, and hardware resources. We collected response times and throughput, both locally and over the internet from our facility in Northern Virginia. We monitored the injector resources to maintain confidence in our response time results. Because we could provide a complete picture of the system's capacity, this customer was able to complete their Oracle upgrade in time for fall enrollment with confidence. Are you getting ready to update, upgrade, or replace a critical system? Are you concerned about performance or scalability risks? We can gather information to identify and validate your system's capacity. We can then help you disseminate the actionable information you need to move forward on your critical project with confidence. We use a consultative approach to design the right test program for you that addresses the needs and concerns of your stakeholders. How can we help?